ॐ गणानां त्वा गणपतिगं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पतान् शृण्वन्नोतिभिस्सेदसादनं प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनेवते दीनामवित्रयवतो गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम ओम साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वः प्रचोदयात्। ओम जयन्ती मंगलकाली भद्रकाली कपालिनी दुर्गा क्षमा शिवदात्री स्वाहा स्वदा नमोस्तुते। ओम शांति शांति शांति। Sairam Lin, Sairam from Malaysia.
Sairam Sharma, Sairam from New Zealand. Thank you, Swami, for allowing Sharma and I to impart a story that is funny and very touching by turns. Welcome to our listeners. As always, we love and value you very, very much. The topic today is Swami's look-alike. My husband and I began taking groups to see Bhagavan in the early 2000s. And in 2000, we took groups before that. But this group we were taking in 2006, as I recall. The members of the group had been selected by our national secretary, and the original group leader had to bow out at the very last minute, and so we were called in at the 11th hour to take this group to India to see Swami. It was 21 strong, and it was a very, very wide assortment of people coming, but one stood out, and this was a Maori gentleman who we will call Peta, because that was absolutely not his name. Now, a few months previous to the trip, Mr. Peta had just been released from prison. He was about 30 years old. I don't know what he was in prison for, but as he left the prison, he was walking up the main street of a large New Zealand town when he heard the sound of bhajans coming out from a local community hall. He was very attracted by the sound of these bhajans, and he looked in the door and saw a very large picture of Swami with his big afro. Now, this gentleman also had a very big afro, and from behind, he looked exactly like Swami. And he decided, Swami is my bro. Swami must be my brother. I will come in here and join in this celebration. He thought it was some kind of celebration. And everyone was astonished that from the back, he looked very much like Swami. He was even short, and this huge afro, of course. Now, from the front, he didn't really look like Swami at all. But from the back, you could have fooled anyone. And the Indian people in the bhajan commented on this. Oh my goodness, you look just like Swami from behind. Well, Mr. Peta started attending all the bhajans, and he decided that he would start dressing like Swami. And he got his wife, his long-suffering dear wife, who was a very good seamstress, to start stitching up some outfits. Now, he didn't have an orange robe made, but he had orange pants and orange kurta and bright yellow kurta made with yellow pants, and he created quite a stir because he started showing up at Sai conferences. And this caused quite a stir because several of the office bearers said, we can't have this. He can't be coming here looking like Swami. We will have to speak to him. However, at one of the conferences, he turned up, and he was in bright yellow bell-bottom pants and a bright yellow kurta. And we had a speaker from Prashanti Nilayam. It was Professor Venkatraman. And Venkatraman was really quite taken with Mr. Peta's story, that he had come out of prison and seen and heard the bhajans and was very attracted to Swami. And Professor said to him, Mr. Peta, I think you need to come to Prashanti Nilayam and have the darshan of Bhagwan. And so we were tasked, my husband and I, with taking Mr. Peta to Prashanti Nilayam. Now, on the day, we were all to meet at the airport, and Mr. Peta showed up, fortunately not dressed like Swami, and he had with him a very large purple velvet bag. And in it was a very large rock that he had taken from what he called his sacred mountain, and he wanted to give this rock to Swami. We were all a bit concerned about this because the rock was very big and very heavy. And I said, we don't have a seat on the plane for that rock. What are we going to do with it? And Mr. Peta said, oh, no problem. You can all take turns holding the rock. And I didn't think the airline would let him on the plane with this thing, but they did. And so all of us had to take turns holding this rock in our laps all the way to India. By this time, some of our group were getting a bit annoyed because this rock was heavy. But Mr. Peta was determined he was going to give Swami this rock in darshan. Well, that was going to create some problems, as you can imagine. But when we got to Singapore, we all were having a layover. In those days, you had a layover, and we had a hotel. And that evening, we saw Mr. Peta dressed in an orange robe going out of the hotel and giving darshan to people out in Singapore. Well, you can't imagine the consternation this caused. And he didn't come back. And that morning, my husband said, right, if he's not turning up, we are leaving without him. And we had looked in his room, it was open, and there was a whole cupboard full of Swami outfits. Can you believe it? He was going to show up in Prashanti Nilayam dressed just like Swami. My husband said, that's it, we're leaving without him. Well, at the last minute, we had loaded everybody into the minivan, and here comes Mr. Peta, dressed in regular clothes. He jumped into the van, and he only had a small carry bag with him. In his haste to find us in the minivan, he had left behind his entire wardrobe in his hotel room. Thanks to Swami, obviously Swami knew and interfered here somewhat and made him forget or not have enough time to pack all of his Swami outfits. So we breathed a great sigh of relief. However, he had the rock with him. And of course, we were all tired of carrying it, and we made him carry the rock. And we got to, Bangalore, and then from there we took a minivan to Prashanti Nilayam. And all the way, we made him carry the rock. We'd all had enough of this. Well, we got to Prashanti Nilayam, and we were all given rooms. Fortunately, my husband and I had our own room, and the men were divvied up into various rooms with 4 apiece in a room. And 3 of our group were bunked in with Mr. Peta and the rock. Well, on the very first day of darshan, my husband said, you cannot take that rock. Leave it here because they will take it off you as we go into the darshan area. And so he accompanied Mr. Peta. And of course, Mr. Peta was wearing darshan whites. We made sure that he was wearing darshan whites. But he caused a great stir anyway with that great big afro. And the Sevadal said to my husband, you will have to get this man's hair cut next time you bring him in. We cannot have him coming in here. People think that he is Swami from behind. Well, they got front row, and Swami came past looking at my husband and Mr. Peta, and he had this quizzical look on his face, and who are you? And he didn't speak to him. But Mr. Peta held out his passport, and Swami blessed it. put his hand on it and blessed it. So this gave Mr. Peta some encouragement that he could bring the rock. Well, my husband said, look, you're going to have to get that afro cut. And so the next day, Mr. Peta didn't have it cut, but he put a headband around it and tied it back. Still in his darshan whites, he came in and the Sevadals were not happy. They said, look, we have told you that man has to have his hair cut. Again, they got front row. Swami came by and looked at him even more amusedly now that he has this headband with the huge afro sticking out on all sides. And Mr. Peta held out his seat cushion, and Swami blessed that, put his hand on it, slapped it. So next day, my husband insisted that Mr. Peta go out and get a haircut. Mr. Peta went out and got his head shaved. He came back bald as an egg, and then he put on one of his outfits, as we call them. I think he put on a yellow robe of some description, went out into the village, and people there thought he was some kind of Tibetan yogi or saint and started giving him money and their jewelry. He came back very excited. He had his hands full of all kinds of money and jewelry, and by this time he was getting quite full of himself and was blessing everybody, putting his hand up and blessing people. Thought he looked like not the Dalai Lama, but like some kind of Tibetan Lama. Well, by this time he was very keen to take the rock in, and in despair my husband went to see Professor Venkatraman, who said, don't worry, I will speak to Swami about this rock. And he came back to my husband and said, the rock must go into the meditation garden. It can become part of a waterfall feature that is being built there. And Mr. Peta was quite happy about this. He was very happy to hear that the rock was going to become part of the meditation garden, and it will still be there today. So the next day they came into darshan, and he was dressed nicely in his darshan whites, and I think they got a very good seat. I don't think it was front row. And then Swami passed by and everyone had a nice darshan. And I think everyone breathed a sigh of relief because it looked like our gentleman, Mr. Peta, was finally calming down and getting the swing of the ashram life. Well, then he started going out and spending all of his money on bread, which he was distributing to all the beggars in the village, and he was sitting down in the dust with the beggars saying, these are my brothers. Well, the beggars all thought this was marvelous because they were all getting free bread, and he was helping them make Maori-style sandwiches with cheese and tomatoes and all this. And pretty soon he had this ragtag bunch of beggars happily walking along behind him. Of course, they weren't allowed into the ashram, but this was creating a bit of a spectacle out into the village. So by this time, we were all getting a little bit fed up with all this, but no matter what, he held out to Swami, and darshan Swami would always bless it with his hand. And Swami seemed to be very amused by all of this, but I tell you, when you've got someone in your group who's always, you never know what they're going to get up to next, it becomes very exhausting. And I must say, we didn't get an interview in that trip because really, when you cause a bit of a spectacle, even if there's just one person in the group causing problems, Swami won't call. Quite often he won't call because he wants unity in the groups. He wanted unity. And of course, we weren't supposed to go. We had told the group, please do not go wandering out in the village and doing things to attract attention. And of course, this is what Mr. Peta was doing. So long story short, we were looking forward to getting home. Even though the group got a lot of grace, one of the gentlemen there, a married man, had his wedding ring blessed by Swami in the darshan line. Swami blessed his wedding ring. We knew the man was having some difficulty at home with his marriage, and Swami blessed his wedding ring and left a lovely print of Vibhuti on the wedding ring, which was wonderful, and I can report that the man's marriage improved greatly once he returned home. home. And Swami spoke to me several times in the darshan line, so really we considered the trip very blessed, but we couldn't wait to get home. And when we got to the airport, and even though the group wanted us to have one last little get-together, my husband and I said, no, we will just say goodbye right now, and off we went home and breathed a deep sigh of relief, because it can be quite testing being a group leader, because you really are responsible for everyone in the group, for their health, for their behavior, and to make sure that they follow the ashram rules. And you really don't have a lot of time for yourself or for your own sadhana when you're a group leader, because you are always at the beck and call of your group. You serve them to the very hilt, and certainly getting them to a doctor or to make sure that they are keeping healthy is number one. And number two is making sure that everybody behaves themselves. And according to Mata Betty's rules, we always enforced Ma's rules, which she said were Swami's rules. So when we got home, we said, well, that's that, we will make sure that on our next group, we will vet the group members and make sure that everyone understands that they are not to disrupt the group. And several years passed by, and I never gave the Mr. Peta another thought. We never saw him again at conferences or centers. But then I had a devotee arrive from Canada, and she said, I would like to see some of New Zealand. And I said, I will take you down to, and I named the town. It was actually the town where Mr. Peta was from. It's a very lovely tourist type town. I took her down there, and we went to the very famous Maori. It's like a park with many thermal features. It's called Whakariwa, very famous, beautiful place. And who should be there was Mr. Peta. And he was wearing a shirt and a tie, and he was with the mayor of the town. And he was the guide and was training ex-gang members to be guides in this Maori tourist park. And these were boys who had been in a lot of trouble with motorcycle gangs, but had dropped out and reformed. And Mr. Peta was the one who had counseled them and reformed them and found them jobs. And he was like a dad to them. And wearing around his neck, he had a great big mala of Rudraksha beads that I remembered Swami had blessed. And in the back of his car was his darshan pillow, which had Om Sai Ram embroidered across the back. It was a big red pillow with gold letters saying Om Sai Ram. And I said, Mr. Peta, Sai Ram, how are you? He said, oh, Sai Ram, Lynn, have you met the mayor? He introduced me to the mayor, and I introduced him to my devotee friend. And I said, well, my goodness, this is a big surprise. Are you still dressing up as Swami? And he laughed and he said, no. He said, I was a bit of a naughty boy on that trip, wasn't I, Madam Lynn? And, and we all ended up having a good laugh over it. But see how beautifully Swami took this ex-prisoner and led him straight to his divine lotus feet. With all the hiccups, with all the problems, nevertheless, Swami loved this boy. He knew that this boy looked a little bit like him, and he was Swami's look-alike. Om Shri Sai Ram.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Om Tasmat Karunya Bhavena Raksha Sayeshwara. Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Sayeshwara Arpanamastu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.